Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel where I talk about movies. This is my second movie of my second reboot 2.0. Today I got a really great film to talk about, and this is the Roaring Twenties from 1939. This is just a great Criterion release. 4K UHD, looks magnificent. The black and white photography by Ernest Haller is just fantastic. It stars Jimmy Cagney. Priscilla Lane gets top billing in this film with Cagney. The secondary figure you can see in the background, one of his last films where he played Second Banana, and that is Humphrey Bogart. A great performance by Gladys George as Panama. Directed by Raoul Walsh. Walsh in his first film, directed at Warner Brothers Studio. And this is it's 1939, and the Roaring Twenties is probably considered a culmination of summation of the Warner Brothers gangster film style, very unique style, very fast-paced. Walsh brings some very tender moments, as Walsh was very good at tender moments for all his action sequences. But it's the genesis of it came from Mark Hellinger, who was a newspaper reporter, well known, and he eventually goes to Hollywood and becomes some sort of executive. He's known for The Naked City, the post-World War II era of bringing the cameras out into the street and giving a documentary style to some crime films, and of course they were very well done. Here, the genesis of this movie comes from a story that he had written, and he was evidently involved in the screenplay as well. And there's a very strange prologue at the beginning of the film that would lead you to believe you're going to see a sort of docudrama, but you're not. It does touch certainly on historical events. It covers a lot of ground, and Hellinger means it to be a nostalgic movie, but also very much a screed against prohibition. Prohibition as the cause of so much crime in America. From the Volstead Act in the 1920s, and there was actually a constitutional amendment that had to be overturned. Franklin Roosevelt, when he ran for president in 1932, one of his major promises to the country that he kept was that he would overturn prohibition. And by that time, the country was eager to do just that. So the film, The Roaring Twenties, covers a lot of ground, and one might say maybe it covers too much ground, but it moves fast, and which you can always count on from Warner Brothers and certainly from Raoul Walsh as well, starting in the foxholes of World War I, and the returning soldiers whose jobs were promised them when they returned, but there were no jobs when they came back. There was a depression in the post-war era, and the way to get ahead, the way to succeed in a capitalist country that sees financial success as the ultimate success. These characters were never going to get that success through legitimate means or illegitimate business means, but they certainly were able to get it within the context of these films, becoming gangsters. From 1930, Public Enemy, one of the great Jimmy Cagney performances, kind of inaugurated the gangster style film with Scarface, and then there were many others, and they became, in the 1920s, they became charismatic figures, and people wanted to read about them. They wanted to know about these gangsters. Of course, the real life gangsters were nothing like the Warner Brother gangsters, but they had style, and no more so than somebody like Cagney, who was basically a performance artist. He gave performances. He gave everything he had as an artist. And in a sense, gangsters are always performing. They're playing a role. They're playing the bad guy who gets success. He's good, he's bad. In the Roaring Twenties, Cagney is really playing that to the hilt, a good bad guy. And his dynamism, his ability to play all ranges of emotions. It's all here in this film. You know, his lively eyes, his expressive voice. You just can't take your eyes off Cagney. And here we get a, as I said, the cause of crime being no jobs, and the returning veterans had no prospects. They seemed to have a hopeless situation. Poverty was also a cause of crime. Juvenile delinquency. In an earlier film, Angels with Dirty Faces came out a year earlier, and again, Humphrey Bogart, as he is in Roaring Twenties, plays the second banana, the really bad guy. Pat O'Brien, who's often in these Warner Brothers type films, plays a very sanctimonious type priest. But here, Cagney is really the ideal to the poverty-stricken juvenile delinquents, children that don't see any other way to succeed in life other than crime, and to these boys in Angels with Dirty Faces, they were the dead end kids who are making their second or third film. So they idolize Cagney, and then in the Roaring Twenties, we have the returning veterans, the hopelessness, economic hopelessness. But this was the culmination of all that kind of depression, economic poverty, but then the war came. Now, this isn't the end of gangster films. Gangster films sort of morphed into film noir. Cagney didn't want to play any more gangsters, but Raoul Walsh got him to play White Heat, and Cagney was always a white hot actor, so this was one of his great performances where he literally explodes. He's so hot, he literally explodes at the end of the film. But here we have Cagney as an out-and-out psychopath, the criminal as psychopath, and we have the Freudian element that was so popular in Hollywood films, and it became so popular in Hollywood films in the 1940s. So not only is he a psychopath, but he has a mama fixation. And if you've ever seen the film, you know the other famous scene besides the ending is when he hears of his mother's death in a cafeteria in prison, and he goes absolutely berserk. And so these are, again, this is a culmination. Roaring Twenties is a culmination. We're not going back to that kind of gangster film again. And so the film itself is infused with melancholy and nostalgia for an era that's gone by. To the audience, this is 1939. Most of them had lived through this era. And it was a very, very strange and unusual, and an era that the Depression sort of, counterbalance. We've lived through this awful Depression, and look what happened in the 1920s. And this is also a film. Not only do we have Cagney, but we have Raoul Walsh, and this is Walsh's first film for Warner Brothers. His career really took off in the 1940s with so many movies. High Sierra, I mentioned White Heat. There were so many more, and other collaborations with Cagney in The Strawberry Blonde, where I think Cagney plays a dentist in a kind of tender love story. And tenderness is really a part of Walsh's approach to making movies, which is very strange because he's basically remembered as a man's director, barroom brawls and shootouts, and there's a great shootout at the end of The Roaring Twenties. And Cagney himself went on to become an independent producer, and he had variable results. Bogart, his second banana, who we often shot and killed in these movies, would become the bigger star in the 1940s. He got the great roles of Sam Spade and The Big Heat and The Big Sleep for Howard Hawks, and playing Raymond Chandler's private investigator, and in the 1960s in particular, and of course Casablanca, But in the 1960s, I know when I was in college, Bogart was the rage. I mean, he was this cool style, this cynical outlook at life. And Cagney really didn't have that kind of, in his independent producer days, he didn't have really significant roles that have been remembered. But I'm going to tout a film here, which I always try to, whenever I get a chance, I try to tout this film, and I have this chance right now, and that is Billy Wilder's 1, 2, 3, in which he gives, when you're talking energy, dynamism, and just sheer sheer grasp of machine gun dialogue and monologues. It's just a performance to be remembered, 1, 2, 3. But we're not talking about those films. We're talking about the Roaring Twenties, and it is a great example of Cagney's dynamic range, and I have to emphasize range. And these films, I grew up right outside New York City, Channel 9, $1 Million movie. They would show Cagney all the time. The ending of Roaring Twenties always got to me. Cagney, the ending of Public Enemy as well. And Angels with Dirty Faces, that was another one. I probably saw those movies a couple dozen times in my young childhood. I'm not sure how much good those kind of films did, but they certainly was the birth of my great imagination of one of the greatest stars in the history of movies, Jimmy Cagney. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.